We're back.
Hello everyone, thanks for checking out our latest video. This time we're going to be talking about change. This is one of the most important chapters of the book, I would say. It's one of the longest. We're actually splitting this video into two parts. We're going to talk about the main content of the chapter, and then we're going to, in a separate video, we're going to talk about the cycle of change and the workbook for the chapter. So,
for those of you following along at home, it's chapter 6.
And I'm Matt Rouge. This is J.B. Symons, whose face you see on the cover of the book.
Right. It's a better looking face.
Flying along, yes, very good. Okay, so let's get right into talking about change. One of the first things we say in the chapter, it may actually be the first thing we say in the chapter. Yes,
Pretty
it
close.
is. It is. The conventional wisdom on change is dead wrong.
Right. Most people talk about change as something they don't want. But I guarantee you that if you sit down and looked at the changes that you want in your life, that list will be considerably longer than the changes that you don't want. The real issue here is someone else's change, or change that is influenced on you from an outside source of some kind. And the bulk of change comes from the outside source. It doesn't come from yourself. There is a possibility, though, to live a life so that the majority of your change is internal rather than external, something that you choose to be. And it also includes just your attitude about change, that when change occurs, even though you may be upset or angry or disappointed in that particular event of change, you're able to accept it, go on, see it as a part of life, and move on and not dwell in it. As a therapist, I talked to lots and lots of people who just could not let go of an event of change, and sometimes it was decades old.
Right.
And so their mental health and wellness was just completely impaired by history.
Right.
And so I'll say this more than once, but they were going through life backwards. Instead of being able to face forward and look at the change that they wanted to occur, they were just impaled by the events of the past and just continue to look back into their history. They're going through life backwards.
They're not facing the future, they're facing backward.
No, that's it.
And it's hard to see where you're going when you're in that position.
Yes, that's where I've been.
Right, right. So we noted in the book that all change causes grief. This is actually a pretty old spiritual truth.
Yep.
In Buddhism, for example, there's the concept, and my Sanskrit's a little bit rusty, but viparinama dukkha. There's 3 types of dukkha: the pain, the pain of change, and the pain of being a composite being, actually. And in this case, Wikipedia says this about that: the anxiety or stress of trying to hold on to what is desirable, and the frustration of not getting what you want.
Right. It's the push-pull of change. And that the process of, you mentioned all change has grief. Let me speak to that just for a moment, is that sometimes that grief is seconds old. And other times that grief is almost a lifetime. And that's an easy example. I've done over 300 weddings, and I guarantee you that when the bride begins to walk down the aisle, okay, I almost always look at the groom. And the groom catches the bride, and just for a moment, you can see his eyes dilate, and there's a moment of, holy mackerel, it's a change.
Right.
Okay. Now that change is an instantaneous moment of good grief.
Right.
For me, and brides are historically all beautiful. It might not be the next day, but during that moment, there's a spectacular vision coming down.
Right.
And there's a moment of grief. If you look at sometimes the parents, they too are experiencing that moment of sensation that there's a change coming here, and it's something they want.
Right.
But it still begins with that moment, and when we talk about later the area, the bridges that we can get across to a sense of wellness, that's in the next chapter. But how to deal with that, and how to have friends, or how to have the right attitude to get across that bridge of wellness, so that you live in a more well environment here and here. And understanding the cycle of change, which we're going to talk about later, helps to get into that quicker, okay?
Right.
Know where you are.
Okay, makes sense. So you have noticed that when it comes to change, we tend to go through the stages of grief that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross
Oh, yeah.
originally formulated about death. And actually, it doesn't take a huge death or something, a big change like that in our life to bring us into these stages.
Well, it's a symbolic death. It's a death of something that used to exist. It doesn't have to be a physical death. Okay. I had the opportunity to actually study with Kubler-Ross when I was in seminary.
Oh.
She was there as a visiting professor, and so we had a lot of conversations about the stages of grief, and obviously denial is one, and acceptance is at the other end. But I saw that because I did an awful lot of work in substance abuse, drug and alcohol issues, and I saw an immediate application of that grief process, not just with death, because her book is on death and dying.
Right.
And that we talk about being able to apply those stages of grief to any kind of change. And it was kind of interesting that she had not quite seen the application. She was only applying it to the grief process of true death,
Right.
physical death. And so we began some great conversations about being able to apply that. And that's what we're doing right now, is that anytime the world of change happens, you have a sense of denial, and we'll call that the moment of grief,
Right.
and how deep you want to go into that.
Right.
So it's almost like a stone skipping across the water in the marriage situation. So it doesn't go deep at all. It just skips in a moment of grief and like, oh, I'll be okay.
Right.
But sometimes people get trapped in anger. They get trapped in depression, which is a fairly common place to settle in. And sometimes it's a combination. When they get to acceptance, which is the final stage, what they're doing is sometimes is accepting their grief, and they're accepting their depression, and they're accepting their anger. And just as a point for you and others, is that as you look at people going through grief, try to recognize where they are and meet them there. It was never my goal to bring someone to acceptance. They must get there themselves.
Right.
You identify where they are, talk about where they are, what they're experiencing at that, how they got there, and are they able to move in any direction? Because sometimes you get to acceptance and boom, you fall right back to depression.
Right.
You get to anger and you go back to denial. You're all over the place. It's not linear.
Okay. So when it comes to change, we find that the one thing that we can really change most easily in life is ourselves. And in fact,
Yeah.
we can't go out and, I'm going to change the whole world, but I'm not going to change myself.
No. There's different kinds of motivation, which is another chapter. Everybody is self-motivated. Okay. And another way of saying that is that when I talk to people in business or in any environment, I explain to them that you cannot motivate people, but you can demotivate them. You can't turn them off, but you can unplug them. You can create an environment in which people feel good about being there. You can also create an environment in which is just so toxic that they are demotivated in it. And I've got plenty of examples of how and when that's happened and what began to happen to the company, to the individuals, families. It's just incredible.
Right. One other important fact about change is we change when the benefits of change outweigh the benefits of old behaviors.
Think of it like a fulcrum. I'll use this. Is that down here is your current behavior, okay? And there's benefits to it.
Right.
Okay. In order to, the new behavior is over here. In order to get to the new behavior, you have to pile on the benefits. So one of the easiest way to look at as to why people aren't changing is because they don't have enough benefits to the new behavior.
Right.
Okay. And so it might be temporary. I'll do this, and then you fall right back because the weight of the old benefits exceeds the weight of the new benefits. So
Right.
you've got to add benefits. What's the benefit? What's the benefit? And in the goal sheet that we've created, there's a section on what's the benefit of this change, of this goal, that kind of thing. And that is
pretty crucial.
It's a crucial component of the goal sheet. If you don't have clearly defined benefits of this new behavior for yourself, not just taking care of other people, you won't change.
Right.
You'll snap back to old behavior.
Okay. One of the issues where change is really, really important to people is drug addiction. Drug addiction causes problems, but it has some benefits to the users, and then it becomes that pain versus pleasure balance.
Wow.
Yeah.
We don't have enough time on any video to talk about addictive personality disorders. That, let me just make it somewhat simplistic.
Okay.
That's different than simple.
Yeah.
It's an unrealistic expectation.
Right.
That once a person has an addictive personality disorder,
Right.
okay, one of the best things you can do to help that person is to put that addiction into an acceptable behavior, okay?
How does that work?
So that, I've seen people go from drug addiction to physical exercise addiction.
Oh, okay. You're like transfer the addiction to something that works.
You're going to be addicted to
in a
something.
positive direction.
Let's put it into something.
Okay.
Work is the most common area of transference. Exercise is another common area of transfer. There are ways in which you can do, once you get to a healthier area of addiction, you need to dial that down too, because I've seen people who have gone from drug addiction to exercise addiction and they hurt themselves. I mean,
Right.
they have pulled muscles, they've got bone problems, that kind of stuff. So being able to dial it down, at least you're dialing down something that is somewhat healthy versus trying to dial down substance abuse addiction. Okay, so that's a whole world. So.
Right. As an example of a positive change that can be more or less easy, certainly easier than quitting a serious addiction, we could get a job offer and we could say, this is a great opportunity, this will be great for my career, it'll be more money. And even though there are benefits to where you're at now, such as you like your house, people can give that up, they can make moves and other things to get those new benefits in the case of a job offer.
Sometimes job offers, let's talk about where we're moving from. Are we moving to something we want, or are we moving away from something we don't want?
It could be either way, right?
Yeah, so that job offer looks good because it helps me move away from something I don't want.
Right.
You really haven't evaluated or taking a clearly defined look as where am I going with this?
Right.
So is it really truly pleasure, or are you moving away from pain?
Right. Right.
We discussed that in another chapter, I think.
Yep. We did, and also we can look at with respect to that job change, whether it's going to increase total overall satisfaction or not.
Yeah, yeah. I hope our listeners understand when I say we're looking for the upper right-hand quadrant all the time. That's where satisfaction and pleasure reside.
The happy quadrant.
The happy quadrant, upper right-hand corner. If you don't understand that, read the book.
Okay. Well, that is going to cover what the main part of chapter 6, but in the next video, we're going to talk about the cycle of change
Right.
and the workbook.
Fair enough.
So thanks, and come back and watch that video too, please.